Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the November meeting of the Boston Art Commission. My name is Karen Goodfellow, and I'm the Director of Public Art in the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. And in that capacity, I'm also the Director of the Boston Art Commission. Let's take a moment to update our names and pronouns and make sure we are all muted. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this meeting virtually. To ensure public access to the deliberations of the Boston Art Commission, the public can join this meeting through telephone and video conferencing. For those of you with us today, this meeting is being recorded and closed captioning is available. You can access it at the bottom of the screen. If you have trouble locating the button, please chat us for assistance. The Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture and the Boston Art Commission believe that public art is any artwork installed in publicly accessible spaces where they can be experienced by everyone for free. We engage in discussions about public art in Boston in order to foster the creation and collection of artworks that reflect the people, ideas, histories, and futures of Boston, which is on the traditional homeland of the Massachusetts people. We acknowledge the continuing presence of the Massachusetts as well as the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples. We also recognize the Indigenous peoples represented in the city's residents in addition to those in the diaspora. For transparency and community input, artworks proposed for City of Boston property are reviewed and discussed at public meetings of the BAC on a regular and usually monthly basis. Working together with the public art team and the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, the BAC is an independent board composed of 2 ex officio and 7 volunteer community members appointed by the mayor. The BAC has exclusive authority to approve and commission artworks intended to be added to the city's collection or to be placed on city property. Our meetings are generally held on the second Tuesday of every month at 4:30, like today, and we hope you'll continue to join us. We have a dedicated public art team, and this team facilitates the BAC's monthly public meetings and manages all phases of Boston's public art projects in collaboration with the Boston Art Commission, community members, and colleagues at the City of Boston. Helping to facilitate this meeting are Sarah Rodrigo, Senior Public Art Project Manager, and Amber Torres, Public Art Project Manager. And Amber will add our contact information to the chat. Now I'll pass to Chair Pasnick.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm calling this public hearing to order at 4:35 p.m. Today, the Boston Art Commission will be holding its monthly public meeting. I will now take the roll call of commissioners to confirm a quorum. After I state your name, commissioners, please say here. I will begin with John Andres.
Here.
Michael Canizzo.
Here.
Cara Elliott Ortega.
Here.
Brian Hone.
Here.
And I believe, are there any other commissioners here that I missed? We do have a quorum. It's not a large one, but we do have a quorum, so we can continue the meeting. On this slide, you'll see today's agenda. The full agenda is posted publicly on the city's website, boston.gov. We'll now review meeting minutes from the October 11th meeting and the October 31st special meeting of the Boston Art Commission. Are there any comments or modifications any commissioner would like to make? I did send in 2 corrections, one which was that the date was wrong on one of the notes, and the other was a mistaken reference to signage instead of lifting the making an exception to the moratorium. I believe those 2 changes were made, Karen?
Yep.
Okay,
yes.
Great. Any other comments on the minutes from commissioners? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to accept? Can we do both at once, Karen?
I think that should be fine, unless
Okay.
they're different.
I think, let's see if somebody has a motion for both.
I make a motion that we accept the minutes for the October 11th, 2022 and the October 31st, 2022 meetings of the Boston Art Commission.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, John. If you are in favor with the motion, please say yes when I call your name. And I see Kim Pinder has joined us, so I'll call her name too. Great, thanks, Kim. Let's see, John.
Yes.
Michael.
Yes.
Cara.
Yes.
Brian
Yes.
and Kim.
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well, so the motion passes. Now I'll turn it over to Karen for her director's report.
Thank you. We have 4 presentations on our agenda for review today. The final acceptance for The Joy of Growing by Mattaya Fitts for the Peabody Apartments in Dorchester, signage for MASARY Diffusion by MASARY at the Boston Arts Academy in Fenway, signage for The Embrace by Hank Willis Thomas for Boston Common, and the moratorium on artworks and signage plaques for the Boston Common. Very quickly, we'll go through the director's report. We have a few updates about long-term commissions. Turmoil by Sobek at the Roxbury branch of the Boston Public Library is complete, and we anticipate it will be presented for final acceptance in December. We are also planning an artist talk at the branch in mid-January and look forward to sharing more information on that soon. Simon Donovan and Ben Olmsted will be installing the Creative on December 7th, weather permitting, in front of the newly opened Boston Arts Academy in Fenway. And the Afro-Latin Music and Dance mural by Roberto Chow was completed at Mozart Park. There was an opening celebration last Saturday. You can see photographs of the event on the right, and our very own Amber Torres was able to attend and say a few words. The Eyes of the Future by Yuki Lee for City Hall Plaza has been fabricated and installed. You can see photos of the installed artwork to the right. The plaza will officially be opening next Friday, November 18th, and we should have more detail about that event later this week, and we'll send them to the commission. Priscilla De Carvalho, the artist commissioned to create a new artwork for the Adams Street branch of the Boston Public Library, visited the site, met with librarians and Amber last weekend. She is working on community engagement as well as considering specific sites for her preliminary design. In terms of existing collections, projects are wrapped up for the season, so we don't have a lot of updates for collections projects. I do want to share that a short-term project that this commission approved in September for the Boston Common, Portraits of Pride by photographer John Hewitt and creative designer and curator Jean Dolin, was vandalized just a few days before it was scheduled for deinstallation. At least 3 of the portraits were slashed. No arrests have been reported. I believe there is talk of a future installation in process, possibly for spaces like City Hall Plaza, but funding would need to be secured. Now I'll pass back to you, Mark.
Okay, yeah, that was deeply upsetting to read the news about that piece that we had just approved. I think it's terrible slight towards the community, as well as a terrible act of vandalism towards artwork. All right, well, thank you, Karen. We'll now move on to items on the agenda for public review, testimony, and commission vote. Here is how you can participate in today's meeting. During the meeting, please keep yourself muted. If you have technical difficulties during the meeting, you can ask questions in the chat and a member of staff will help you. After presentations and commissioners clarifying questions, I may invite public testimony. If you would like to participate, you can press the raise your hand icon and staff will put you in a digital line for comment. You can also let staff know that you have a question in the chat. If you're calling in, press *9 to raise your hand. Please remember to keep your comments on topic and brief. Our goal is to make this meeting a good experience for all so that community members feel comfortable sharing their feedback and questions. Be mindful of and respectful of other people's time when speaking so that other participants feel comfortable adding their comments. You can submit longer written testimony to bac@boston.gov. While you may disagree with other attendees' testimony, you may not interrupt them during their allotted time. Please keep questions and comments project specific. If you're called on, please state your name, title, program, organization, if relevant. The next presentation for review is final acceptance of The Joy of Growing for the Peabody Englewood Apartments in Dorchester. Amber will present. Amber?
Thank you, Mark. This artwork was commissioned through the Transformative Public Art Program. The final design for this artwork was approved by this commission in April of this year, if you all remember. This mural site is located in Peabody Square in Dorchester at 1875 Dorchester Ave and was identified and chosen in partnership with the Boston Housing Authority. Peabody Englewood is a warm, welcoming community that offers a variety of living arrangements for low and moderate income, elderly and disabled persons. We partnered with the Boston Housing Authority on this project, and we would like to particularly thank Letitia Raymond for all of her work on this and other BHA mural projects. We also want to thank Street Theory and specifically Liza Quinones, who managed this project along with roughly a dozen of our mural commissions over the last year. This work would not have been possible without the incredible leadership and teams at both of these organizations. Mattaya Fitts is a visual artist whose practice encompasses a multidisciplinary approach within a studio and street art discipline. Using figurative elements of abstraction, Mattaya depicts aspects of the human condition in a multi-layered way, inviting the viewer to interpret the work through a lens informed by individual and collective cultural narratives, Earth's ecology, and divine femininity. Next slide. This artwork titled The Joy of Growing is centered around themes of transformation, self-care, love, and the relationship between ourselves and nature. Mattaya's goal in painting this mural is to create a visual metaphor that reminds us to honor and love ourselves in all stages of our life journeys, looking inward so that we can extend the energy outwards and contribute to the care of our communities and the natural world around us. Depicted here is a woman dressed in yellow, standing in tree pose, or Vrikshasana. The use of this tree pose is directly inspired by the trees that surround the bottom of the wall. It is also inspired by the practice of yoga, which originated from ancient India and as a whole is intended to support one's physical, mental, and spiritual health. By standing amongst the trees in this way, she is embracing them in their continuous state of change while acknowledging and maintaining her own self-awareness and grounding energy. Next slide, please. Her hair is composed of milkweed. The butterflies incorporated here are the monarch butterfly, native to North and South America, and the peacock butterfly, found in Europe and Asia. The monarch caterpillar, pictured here, is in a state of feeding, so that it can enter chrysalis, the phase of metamorphosis that takes place before a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. Its size is exaggerated to emphasize the importance of appreciating the early stages of growth, which is often overlooked during one's transformation. It is a visual nod to the Maya Angelou quote that says, "We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty." End quote. The heart-shaped balloon tied around her arm is a reminder to practice self-love and care, and to remember to extend that love to her community and beyond through upwards movement. Lastly, the background pattern is a visual cue that represents flow, energy, and a state of chrysalis. The color palette used in this concept is intended to evoke calmness, warmth, and nature, a juxtaposition against the rough brick wall surface. Commissioners can find additional information about the materials and recommended maintenance of this mural in their folders. Thank you so much, and thank you to Mattaya for the beautiful work. That's all.
Great. Thank you, Amber. That was a great description. So this is now, one of our favorite tasks, which is determining whether we want to accept the work into the City of Boston collection. So we'll open it up to commissioners for any comments or questions. Hearing none. I wonder if members of the community might. Oh,
Mark,
go ahead, Brian.
I'll just kind of generally say thank you to the artist. It's been fun to see these mural projects come to life and to see them come to life quickly. Sometimes our projects are kind of multi-year projects, and these murals have been fun to watch kind of go through that process a little more quickly. So again, just congratulations to the artists and to the community for this new mural.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Any other comments or questions from commissioners? If there are no others, I can open it up to the public if any members of the public would like to make a comment. I'm not seeing any hands raised. So with that, I wonder if we could entertain a motion. Somebody, Brian, would you like to make a motion?
Yep, I can make a motion to accept The Joy of Growing by artist Mattaya Fitts into the City of Boston's public art collection.
Great. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Cara. So as I read off your name, please say yes if you agree with the motion. John,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes,
Cara,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Kim,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. So the motion passes. Congratulations to the artist and to our whole team that helped support him, and the rest of the agents of the city who also supported this from housing. It's great to see some new life on a blank brick wall. So thank you, everyone. Okay, our next up is a review for signage for memory diffusion at the Boston Arts Academy in Fenway. Sarah will give us some background information.
Thank you, Chair. Memory diffusion was recently installed at the Boston Arts Academy in the Fenway neighborhood. The piece is by MASARY. While the artwork received final design approval from this commission in July of 2021, didactic signage was not included in that review. When the artwork was installed, the artist created temporary signage to provide more information about the artwork as the city continues to develop a signage program that's consistent across the collection. We anticipate that the temporary signage will remain in place for some months, and so it requires review. As a reference, our signage policy can be found on page 32 of the policy doc, and you can see a summary of it here for your review. Amber, can you drop a link in the chat? The commission's going to review this artwork itself for final acceptance in the near future into the collection. You'll see some images on the next slide. It's a really exciting new media work. But for now, I'm going to hand this over to Caleb Hawkins from MASARY, who is here, and I believe Nellie is here as well, to present the current signage and talk more about the work that MASARY is doing to develop the final plaque, work that we're excited to partner with them on in the coming months. Caleb, are you?
I'm present.
Excellent. Welcome.
So here, just starting off to familiarize you all with the work that we've been doing at the school. We've been really engaged with various communities in terms of having this artwork find its place. And part of that is really connecting and allowing this artwork to be accessible to those who visit the school and who want to engage in it. Right now, we have a current plaque mounted against the wall. If you go to the next slide, you can see this in fresh detail. This plaque is around 10.5 inch by 10.5 inch and sits around 4 feet 8 off of the ground, which is a ramp in front of the artwork. Right now, this artwork consists of a QR code that links to additional material on our website. But this is an area of design that we're continually working on and improving. And I'd like to offer my colleague Nellie a moment to comment on our process and considerations.
Thank you, Caleb. My name is Nellie Kate, and one of the things that I have been exploring on this project is finding a way to make the work that is so intensely visual accessible to people who are low vision or blind. I'm interested in ways of describing the work through our didactic, like whether that is through Braille or an extension on this page that we've embedded on the QR code that would make it so that someone who wants to enjoy this work can also do that if they cannot see it. And so that's just something that we're exploring in this piece and in our practice more broadly, and are grateful for your support in this.
Great, and the following slide is a current design with an addition of some comments. The one alteration between the previous design shown and this one is the inclusion of the boston.gov public art link below, which forwards people to the collection here of the city. This is a plaque as it stands for our temporary solution, but as we work forward to resolve it and continue working with the city for these accessibility means, we're looking for approval for this design. Thank you.
Okay. Is there, one question well, first of all, great to see you, Caleb. Is there Braille text as a part of this?
This current design does not include Braille.
Would it be possible to add that?
For our
This is
temporary
temporary signage. Is it?
For our temporary signage, Braille has not been included. With our further development, this takes into account a couple of different accessibility approaches, and Braille is planning to be included in the final design for the permanent signage for
Okay.
the work.
Great.
I just wanted to chime in that the turn time on a Braille plaque for this work looked like it was around 6 weeks. And something that we wanted to be really clear about was that we wanted to incorporate other layers of didactic that are not just the kind of like interpretation of the work, but that would include layers of visual description. And so we realized when we submitted the signage that that was something that was like an added layer of consideration that we wanted to take into account.
Okay. All right, well, let me open it up to questions or comments from commissioners.
The question I have, what is the timing then between this temporary plaque and the permanent plaque?
Right now, I think we were engaging in developing the final beginning of next year. And this would be along with the development of the city's approach to signage for the larger collection of the artworks. Right now, having the temporary design holding till the end of the year to produce the final plaque and design in accordance with the city's mandates for the other signage is around the timelining we're looking for to pretty much have this in production once these edits and decisions for accessibility and signage have been made.
I'll just add to that. Thanks, Caleb. That
Thanks, Sarah.
I think realistically, we'd be looking at, 4 to 6 months, possibly a little bit longer, depending on what procurement ends up looking like and how the design process goes.
We're not necessarily being asked to put a time limit on that the sign would be, say, approved for a year, or is it meant to be more open-ended, knowing that there's a second or more permanent sign coming?
I'd say the latter.
Okay. And then one other question. I noticed the website mentioned for MASARY. Is that something that our guidelines allow, or we really just identify the art piece, who the artist is, and then the language? I mean, just want to get some clarification on that piece.
So one of the, sorry.
I think that's a question, maybe Karen? Would you
Sure. So Sarah, do you mind bumping back up to the slide with the policy on it? Yeah. So I think one thing, doing these reviews, I think we could update our policy to be more full on this. But in terms of linking to websites, I think our intention, frankly, was that they would refer to the city website and then it would link out to others. In the signage we're looking at today, there are proposals to link directly to the artist website or an organization's website. I don't think that's what we had in mind when we created our policies, but we certainly didn't say you could not do it. We were mostly interested in providing further content and educational materials. So I think as we further develop our site and have more content available, that might be something that we can explore, like maybe doing a link tree or something like that. But at this point, we don't really have sufficient content on our website that would replace what I think the artist would have available at this time.
A clarification, the QR code goes to a specific project link. So this is a link dedicated specifically to the artwork.
Thanks, Caleb.
But the other link, sorry, the written text is actually the general MASARY Studio website. And I think that's
Correct.
maybe where
I see.
I agree with Michael. Maybe that's not ideal.
Yeah, that's something that I would feel uncomfortable with. It's definitely with the permanent sign, because I think it should really be about the piece and then about the city's collection. So that's why I worry about sort of advertising for, in this case, the studio.
Yeah. So maybe one comment you would consider is if that would be removed from this.
That would be my preference, yes.
Yeah. Or to have a link that goes specifically to, I mean, a written link that goes specifically to that page that the QR code goes to.
Yeah, I guess, yes. Something that doesn't feel like it's advertising the
Yeah.
the artist or the studio that's creating the piece that we're reviewing.
Mm-hmm. Can that be done, Caleb? Is that a pretty, I mean, you could make it a very, like, one word memory diffusion at the end of it, or MD at the end of it, or something.
A
and that
short
would-
link. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does make sense that the QR code and the provided link are unified in terms of where they guide someone who's viewing or tapping into this information. So having those two sources be concise is something that's definitely understandable.
One small comment from me as a graphic designer is the first line has quite a lot of space between the words due to the forced justification on either side. So you might want to just try to tweak that a little bit. It starts to make the text feel like it's falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Caleb, one other thing as well. 2022 should probably be either enclosed in parentheses or separated by a comma, just to note that it's the year that it was made rather than MASARY Studios 2022.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I had a flag for just the placement of the two different language texts. So oftentimes in the interpretation world, we're trying to transition to placing the two translations next to each other. So like left and right versus top and bottom to avoid any kind of hierarchy preferences is a consideration. And then two, similar just to Mark's comment about the justification. I think the spacing in the lower block of text could be kind of addressed just for a little bit kind of more legibility, I think.
Uh-huh.
And then one of my flags too was thinking about, so the instruction to scan the QR code, just the consideration of the difference between that being under the block of text versus being underneath the QR code. So if you're kind of inviting somebody to use the QR code, transitioning that instruction over to the QR code itself, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other comments from commissioners? How about comments from the public? Seeing none, I wonder if we could have a motion that would include the recommendations and guidance offered today to approve this, and perhaps, I don't know, could we have it checked once by staff, Karen?
Yes, we could definitely do that. I would ask that in the motion, if we could be specific in the language of what you want us checking for so that we can make sure to see it through.
Okay. So who wants to come up? Brian, you had a few of those. We may have to construct this together.
Yes, I just closed my document where I was taking notes. Okay, I can make a motion to accept the do we say temporary signage maybe for
So yeah,
memory diffusion by MASARY, with the understanding that MASARY addresses the justification of the text, the addition of a comma to separate MASARY and the date of the creation, the consideration of the QR code link and where that takes the scanner, What else am I forgetting?
The
Left and
side-by-side
right.
languages.
Oh yeah, the two languages side by side versus kind of a top to bottom placement. Maybe the kind of relocation of the QR code scanning instructions closer to the QR code itself.
Mhm.
I think that's everything.
That's what I
The
got.
link, you said the link matching the QR code, correct?
Yes.
The written link would be the
Yeah.
same. Okay. Great. Was there anything else? I think that answered everyone's.
Should we say
And I
staff
guess-
review?
Yeah, just understanding that
Oh,
that can be
yes.
done at the staff level.
Okay. Great. All right. So did somebody write that down?
Sorry, that was not coherent, but
It was pretty good, I thought. So if you are in agreement with that motion,
I can
please-
second.
Oh, yes, thank you. John just seconded. Okay, thank you for catching me. So if you're in agreement with the motion, please say yes. John,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes,
Cara,
Yes.
Brian,
yes.
and Kim.
Yes, and my daughter goes to this school, so
Oh,
I'm
great.
really enthusiastic.
seen it yet?
Yeah. I've seen it from the outside, like I haven't gone all the way in, but I drop her off every morning.
Oh, great.
I would like to think it's
Uh,
worth the extra 30 steps.
I will if I can park. It's the parking.
Leave the flashers on. I am
Yeah.
also a yes, so we'll just end the vote with that. So that the motion passes. Congratulations, Caleb.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing the temporary sign when we all park our cars with flashing lights and run in.
Run in, yes.
Yeah,
I
thank you all very much.
All right, thanks
And
very
Mark,
much.
before we move on, someone had asked in the chat if anyone can see this, or is it only for students and staff at the school?
You have to get a pass to get in.
Caleb?
Yes. Yeah, Caleb, go ahead.
Yeah, you have to get a visitor pass for the
Yeah.
school.
Mhm.
And it is visible from the street?
It's
Or no?
not visible from the street. No, it's
Okay.
facing the front of the school. It's actually behind one of the main retaining walls in the structure. So you can't necessarily see it from the doors or from outside of the school. But once entering either entryway, it's visible.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Caleb, and your team. Next up, I think we have, let's see. Oh, the embrace signage for Boston Common. And Karen Goodfellow will introduce the project.
Thanks, Mark. And I'll note Allison Poltinas from the Fenway News shared that there are public events scheduled for the school. So there are also opportunities to go in there and probably support the students there as well. Thanks. We are now looking at another proposal for signage, very similar to the last one we looked at. While the final artwork for the Embrace received final design approval from this commission in March of 2021, didactic signage was not included in that review. Today, we'll be reviewing two different proposals for signage related to the Embrace. And for both of these proposals, the BAC should be reviewing for design and content as we did for Masary's. But for installation, you'll also need to lift the moratorium for artworks and related plaques and signage for the Boston Common. So in that way, this one's a little bit different. And we separated out the review of signage from the moratorium just in the order. But we'll review both proposals for signage now. Before I hand it over, let me just share that the first signage proposal is for 3 installation of an informational interpretive sign for the overall artwork and project. And the second is for the engraving of individual names and organizations in stone at the perimeter of the plaza. And in preparation for today's meeting, Chair Pasnick asked me to review our policies around signage with the commission. We did that some already with the previous project. And I've also gone over this with the proponents previously as well. On the interpretive signage, the signage is looking to meet a lot of goals with limited space, providing artwork information and interpretation to be inclusive for visitors who are blind or of low vision, as well as direction to an online presence with audio content. Concerns with the plaza design are being addressed with the signage, but there is ongoing review at the state level by the MAAB. And I believe they're going to be reviewing it on November 14th, which is after our meeting, but we don't know if there will be any changes indicated from that meeting yet. So that's a little bit hard to know. We can certainly update the commission after that meeting. The current descriptive language is much stronger than the current version, or the version we sent you last week. So as you look at that, we've been in conversation with the proponent and with other folks to make sure that things are going in sort of a direction that we're going to be comfortable with. And we've also discussed possible updates to be included in the future. I had conversations with Denise Korn today, as well as Dr. Brennan Terry, who was on the art committee with me and AQUA at the beginning of this project, to think about what some possibilities would be. So I think we're looking at a much stronger version of what you initially reviewed if you looked at your folders last week, but there's also potential for further improvements, I think. And we could go through some of that in the review and conversation today. But I do think the one thing worth noting is that while there's no explicit statement that the Kings were in Boston or had a connection to the Common, the phrase, "the story of the embrace begins here," may be intended to imply it. And that is one of the things we had talked about previously as, hoping that this artwork could do to tell that story. And then notes on the stakeholder engraving. While there are donors and other stakeholders acknowledged in other locations in the city of Boston for older artworks, this conflicts with our current policy on plaques and signage for long-term public artworks that should not include lists of individual funders or donors' names. And additionally, we've had conversations that it might create a precedent for public artworks going forward, listing stakeholders and funders onto the projects themselves in a long-term fashion. There were many stakeholders involved in the development of this project, and we fully understand that they should be celebrated. And that part of the beauty of the project was celebrating that collective action by community, and we do see and understand that. And I will pass to Jonathan and Amari to present.
Great, thank you, Karen. Good evening, everybody. So yeah, just to follow up here, I think we're excited to talk through this afternoon. Again, construction is well underway, and we're excited to see the sculpture come into place in the next few weeks. And again, tonight, really want to talk about these signage elements that really are going to ground the piece and help to sort of provide the level of understanding and interpretation of the piece. It's been something that, the didactic signage is something that had been discussed very early in the landmark hearings many years ago and early meetings with the commission. And I think trying to find the right balance of being again, didactic and using this as an opportunity to be fully accessible is something that we want to talk with you and get some alignment on. So next slide. Again, sort of looks at the scope. So again, you can see here, again, the plaza with the piece in the middle. And again, we have these sort of three paths that lead to it. If we go to the next slide here. So the next slide, again, at a high level, talks about the overall location of these three markers. Again, we want to kind of have these moments for signage along the path so that it's something that you can engage with before getting to the plaza itself. We've also strategically tried to locate these markers near new light fixtures that are going in as well, so that way there's the potential for them to be kind of well lit. And again, we wanted to have these pieces be on the path, but not necessarily in the plaza, just to allow a little bit of kind of critical separation there. Next slide. And in terms of just kind of form, precedent, excuse me, I think one of the things we wanted to do was to have this be simple, elegant, not at all compete with the power and the scale and the presence of the memorial itself. So this idea of kind of a bent metal plate is something that really kind of spoke to us. And then from a kind of color, texture, materiality standpoint, looking at just sort of black metal as being kind of something that we thought made a lot of sense here. This next slide gives you a little bit of a sense of the overall kind of form. So again, this idea of taking this sort of bent metal piece, having it extrude off of a granite base that comes in off the edge of the path. And again, we are left with a canvas that is about 18 inches tall by 32 inches wide for the signage. I think one thing that I do want to note is that it's tough to read in this piece, but we are working with a sign fabricator, and this will actually be two pieces in its construction, so that you'll have one piece that is this bent metal plate that emerges from the ground, and then there'll be a plaque on top of that. that is the sort of canvas for the actual signage. So that way, should there be a need for the sign to be modified, replaced, like there's the ability to have that signage element be replaced without taking out the entire piece. And yeah, so again, I think this idea of the sort of black metal bent piece is something that we've been really excited about. So the next slide here shows, yeah, just the overall kind of composition of what we're looking to kind of create here. And again, as Karen alluded to, there are a lot of requirements we're looking at here, but also we certainly realize the need to create a clear hierarchy to be able to understand what the significant piece of artwork is communicating here. So at a high level, one of the first pieces of context here is to connect to the digital experience that provides stories to the piece, stories to the 65 heroes that we're honoring here. So I guess that explains the experience here, QR code, and link to the website at the top right. Again, the sort of call to action, the call to sort of ground the piece, saying that the story of the embrace began in Boston, again, really is in some ways harkening back to the foundings of this movement and this memorial to really affirm the King's place, the King's story starting in Boston, and then using those next two paragraphs there to, again, describe the piece in a way that just, again, puts context to the inspiration that the artist team put forth to kind of creating this piece, as well as, again, providing some context to the names that you see in the plaza. And then, again, just below the QR code is just the sort of a full accreditation to the piece in terms of, again, name, title, name, date, and artist, and then sort of that it is, again, in the City Boston Arts Collection. And then, again, essentially about half of the signage is devoted to accessibility. The idea of, again, providing a area for Braille to understand, again, to translate the text on the sign, as well as provide a way for the visually impaired to have an understanding of what the piece actually is. So what you see here in that map would actually be a tactile relief that somebody that is visually impaired can actually touch, feel, and get a sense of what the experience of kind of getting to that sculpture is going to be. And again, this is an unprecedented memorial and installation. So thinking through how do we provide something that doesn't feel like it's a barrier, but actually is inclusive in a way to interpret and engage and experience this piece is something that, again, I think this is trying to do. And we've been working with accessibility advocacy organizations, to really kind of hone our approach to this. And again, there is some alignment with this as a way to bring people into the piece, bring people into the project by using these three signs to have this level of interpretation. So yeah, I mean, I can very quickly, the next slide in some ways just describes what I just talked about, that we are working with, we're preparing for approval by MAB at a November 14th meeting. And again, we've also been working with the Boston Disabilities Commission and bringing them the rest of the process. The next slide here, you can go after this one here. Again, these kind of speak to some of the groups that we've been working with pretty closely to really kind of hone and kind of affirm our approach here. And I believe we're actually, Chris Goebel from my office is on this call. I believe we are meeting with the Perkins School of Line and Kim next week to really we built mock-ups and to really sort of get their feedback on, where on the sign we're putting the Braille, how the maps work, and things like that, just to make sure that what we are proposing is in alignment with what makes the most sense here. But again, we've discussed this with them, and there is appreciation for this.
Yeah, Jonathan, if I could just briefly note that we had a good lengthy discussion with Kim Carlson from the Perkins School. She has generally very supportive of our approach, but has generously offered to put together very quickly a focus group to help us hone it, as you say. And David D'Arcangelo, on short notice, has really enthusiastically offered to put together a second focus group to look at our approach to accessibility on the sign, but also more broadly on the site. So we're grateful to both of those organizations and those people for assisting us quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And then, yeah, the next few images really just kind of are conceptual renderings that sort of show the scale of this relative to the memorial. Yeah, again, so you can sort of see the form there. Again, trying to sort of allow for space for approach next to it from a wheelchair. Yeah, and so again, you can also see that in this case, it's next to the street light. Again, this is the approach from marker 2, and then the third one is the last path as well. So again, that is the scope of the again, sort of we're calling it the gateway signage, but this is the interpretive signage that again provides connection to the digital experience, accessibility, grounding, as well as just a little bit of context to the piece itself. And then the next element of signage that we're talking through is this idea of the stakeholder recognition. And I think if you go to the next slide, yeah, so I think we really wanted to kind of carefully consider the scale of this and the approach to where this made the most sense to, in some ways, really celebrate the unique opportunity that this project was in terms of creating an artwork of the scale, the people that were and organizations that were sort of really at the forefront of trying to make this happen, or part of making this happen. So yeah, if you go to the next slide, which is kind of the overall map, you can sort of see the idea that it is coming in off of one of the paths, and the scope of this is along a perimeter piece of curbing, granite curbing, off of the path off of Railroad Mall. Again, the next slide just gives you a little bit more context to where it is. Again, so we're talking about, again, the piece of perimeter curved granite stone there. Next slide really kind of evokes, gives a sense of the scale. Again, this stone is about 9.5 inches tall. We're looking at a 1-inch typeface there to put the names kind of centered within that. And again, in terms of just sort of a precedent, we realize it's not an artwork per se, but at Boston Common, there is the Brewer Fountain, again, where you have stones that are 48 by 18, and then they're very kind of tactfully put in this recognition as well. So we're looking at a similar manner to kind of create that here. And in the next slide starts to give a sense of the scale and the breadth of the stakeholders that we want to celebrate with this accreditation. I think that should wrap us.
Last slide.
Last slide, yeah.
I wonder if it might be useful for us to speak to the first one first and then the second one after. So could we go back to the signage along the perimeter? Sorry, not this, but the physical vertical signage.
Yes.
So I had a few questions myself to start with, and then one of them is, does the projection of the angle comply with code issues about, projecting into a pathway? Does it not project on into the path of movement or anything like that? Is that cleared? You won't have to. I guess that's a question that I have.
Can we
No,
see
good
the
question. That's a good question, and I do think that, yeah, given that angle, I think that we will probably have to increase the depth of that granite base such that it is a little bit further off the curb, so that way we're not hitting. If I can, I can annotate.
You're not in the line of the path of movement.
Correct. Yeah. And again, a lot of this has been kind of late breaking as we've learned more real time in terms of some of the accessibility requirements here. But I think as the sign has increased in size, it initially that sort of elbow aligned with the edge of the granite curb and the asphalt, and I think now you're smart to pick up on that. It is probably going to be inboard of that a little bit more. So yeah, I do think it would make sense to I can slide that to the right, page right here a bit to allow some more space for a deeper granite base, so that doesn't project into the asphalt.
Okay, so that was one question I had, and then I had a couple of graphic comments or suggestions, and then I'll open it up to other commissioners. But I think that there's a lot going on in this. I know you're trying to get a lot of information in, but it does seem like it's not quite yet gelling together. And part of the thing that I think maybe to me is problematic is the second heading, the experience it here, feels like it's competing a little bit too much. And it also feels a little bit like a phrase that's a marketing phrase rather than a kind of artwork phrase. So I'm curious if that could be toned back or made so that there's a clear hierarchy of the embrace being the strongest piece. There's a lot of different font sizes and that sort of thing too. So I think and even the alignment of the QR code isn't kind of working with the text. So I think that there just needs to be some refinement to the overall layout to make it have the kind of hierarchy and clarity that people can engage with it and work with that. Just a couple of very small things. Leaders who led, I think, is a poor sentence structure. So you might want to find another word for leading. So the leaders aren't led, they didn't, leaders who led feels a little bit like it's a repetitive phrase. And then when you use between the years, you should use an N dash instead of a hyphen. I'm not sure. It looks like it's a hyphen, which is, we usually request an N dash, which is a little bit longer and more elegant. And then lastly, I think you don't need the quotes around the 1965 Freedom Plaza. I think you could remove those single quotation marks. If you did feel like they were necessary, the period should be on the inside of them in US English, not in British English. So those are my comments. I'll open it up to other commissioners who might have some other comments or questions.
I have a question. I just have a question about the kind of general placement of the sign in relation to the kind of edge of the sidewalk. And I'm wondering if, Sarah, could you go to the slide where we see the kind of overhead view of the placements of the 3 signs? Here we go. So for example, if you're looking at the sign, at like the marker 2 location, when you're reading the sign, your eyesight is kind of off into the trees, right? So oftentimes when we're placing like interpretive signage next to or kind of in the vicinity of works of art, the goal is to kind of have the viewer looking at the sign, but then also looking at the artwork at the same time. And, for marker 2 or even, marker 3 to some extent, that's a little bit more challenging. I don't know if there's any opportunity to kind of reconsider the placement of the actual sign so that the viewer has the opportunity to read the sign and kind of view the piece at the same time. Or I'm just kind of like wondering how you arrived at the placement of the signage. Might be more of an access consideration within itself, but.
Good question. I think one of the drivers of the sign location was honestly proximity to light. So I think we wanted to sort of be mindful of where we were already making that investment and having new street lights put in. And at the same time, given I think overall issues of light pollution and the common not wanting to put a sign somewhere else that would then require another light somewhere else, or having a sign be integrally illuminated. And I think with regards to the orientation of the marker relative to the path and the piece, we were trying to follow precedent in the common with how things like the benches or even the trash receptacles were always kind of off of the paths, almost sort of offset in alignment with those pieces. So trying to create some kind of conformance with that overall flow and kind of continuity there. So yeah, I think certainly a downside in that is that you will never have that sort of oblique or that sort of direct view whereby you can see the sign and the piece right behind you. Maybe with the exception of marker 3.
Marker 1 and 3 both seem like you're at least looking at it and you turn slightly. Marker 2 seems like you have to turn your back to it. So I wonder if that could be considered flipping sides.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I think marker 2, if I don't know that we've noted that correctly in this plan drawing we were just looking at. It is on the opposite side of the path as it's shown. Oh, no, marker 2 is correctly shown. Yeah, it's across from these existing light fixtures, which was a really guiding point and a necessary one. But we also had the thought in placing these that one's experience of the signage might be distant from the sculpture itself, and that the act of bringing out one's phone and scanning a QR code and digesting that kind of didactic information should not distract from the more emotional and sort of psychological experience of encountering the artwork. So there was this notion of creating a kind of threshold sort of away from the sculpture for that sort of understanding of didactic information.
Yeah, and Chris, if I could just chime in here, it was intended from the artist perspective to allow the art piece to sort of speak for itself as much as possible. So we call these the gateway markers, these are the gateways into that experience. And the idea that they would be offset from actually as if it were in a museum next to the piece, that it actually is surrounding this whole kind of space and place in the park, as opposed to labeling of the artwork. However, now the sign itself covers a lot more information than it was originally intended to do. And so now it kind of does both as sort of an informational guidepost for description, as well as this gateway into this audio experience that then enables you to get closer to the, as approaching this artwork and allowing it to kind of become a personal experience.
If I'm hearing Brian correctly, though, I think he's more talking about the location relative to your visual ability to see the work, even if you're farther removed from it, not having it behind you, but having it sort of within your
Sure.
frame of perspective as you arrive.
I see.
It would seem like marker 2 is the only one that's an exception to that. The others seem to work. Although, are these locations precise, or are they, like marker 1 looks like it's pretty far from the path? Is that correct? Is it really set back?
No, that is correct. That is a annotation on a slide that got shifted. I think that
Okay.
I think it would essentially.
They're all the
help
same
the
distance
curve.
off
Correct.
the path. Okay.
Correct.
Brian, was I right in thinking that that's what you were saying? That it's not necessarily that they're on the path, that you think it should be closer in, but that you think it should be somehow that you see the sculpture when you're reading the piece.
Yeah, I think both of those things.
Yeah.
And I don't want to belabor the point, but just kind of curious to hear how you arrived at that. My only other kind of flag for the actual sign itself was just the way that we're referring to the Boston art collection. I just noticed, when we were looking at the MASARY label, the way that referring to the collection of the city of Boston is a little bit different here, and wondering if we want to try to standardize both of those kind of collection notifiers.
Brian, I was thinking the same thing. There was a clarity that of the previous sign that we saw, that you saw the name of the piece, who created it, the date. Here, that seems all to be kind of lost, and I worry about the hierarchy of the information here. I don't know, because I don't get a sense the name of the piece. I don't get the sense who was the artist of the piece when it was created. It's very small compared to some of the other information. So I agree. I don't know if there's a standardization of the information that should be on these signs.
It's also partly because it's below the QR code and sort of below that big header. There's a lot of ways in which it's moved down on the page. So the things that are probably most important to us are obviously the theme of this, but also the artist and the name of the work and those kinds of things. They do seem a little suppressed here. I would agree with both of you on that.
Well, Mark, to speak back to your earlier point about the hierarchy, originally these were meant to just have very limited information in order to get into that sort of audio experience and storytelling, which brings a lot of voices and stories behind the piece, and as the artist's instruction to let the art speak for itself. So listening to the feedback here, there's a lot of like competing objectives with the sign itself, and also it's appearing very small on my screen. This is a pretty large piece of signage, and I would imagine that the font for that, the name of the artist and everything here is the same size as that other sign that we saw for MASARY on the other piece of artwork. It's just all to scale, and Jonathan and the MAS team are creating mock-ups of this so that you can get a better sense of the actual scale of the typography and the way it works together. So this is definitely going to be tweaked once we get the final amount of Braille and information on that piece as well. So information well taken.
Okay, other comments from commissioners? I guess there is the question of, and Karen brought it up, but it's something that I was wondering about too. And I realize that there's quite a lot of information that's visible on this panel because you'd be connecting to something, but not all of our citizens and visitors and others can really do that. So we like to make sure that the interpretation tells the core of the story. Have you thought about why this is here in this text at all? That they met in Boston and that, the rally, the protest that they, that occurred just a few feet from here, that's not present in this text at all. So I'm curious about that. Is that something you decided shouldn't be here?
Well, the digital experience goes very deeply into that. And again, the artist, Hank Willis Thomas, was inspired by the relationship of the Kings. And this is meant to honor both Coretta and Dr. King and their specific type of civic activism that embraced love and building beloved communities through their civic action. So the answer is yes, there's a lot of thought put into the exact language picked in this part of the narrative, although the narrative is much longer and deeper. This sort of hit the keynotes of what the piece of artwork is meant to evoke. And also speaks to describing the names that are on the plaza itself and why they are there. So the relationship of the Kings and their relationship to Boston and why Boston, as well as the reason why are all these names engraved beneath the plaza, which is a critical part of the overall story.
Okay, other
I don't know if I'm
questions?
answering your question correctly, but
Well, I think you're making a position. I still wonder whether we should be pointing out in this that they met in Boston, or that I can understand why maybe you didn't want to isolate out one of the two figures by talking about the protest march in particular, and maybe that all appears in the digital realm. So I don't have a strong belief that it has to be in there. I just feel like it's a little bit of information that I feel like the public should know.
Yeah.
Maybe people know it enough, but I'm not sure that they do. And this is, our chance to reach them. I don't know what percentage of the visitors will actually engage in the digital process.
Sure.
We know from museum experiences that people barely read these as they are. So limited space and limited amount of information. Maybe the artist and the team feel that that's not as important as other things. Other commissioner comments? Hearing none. Any comments from the public? Okay, also seeing none. Karen, I'm wondering about the relationship with MAB and the process of this in terms of, we've given a lot of feedback here. This is a permanent marker. It's a little bit different than the last one we just reviewed. How much will this be changing, and what does that mean in terms of, does it need to come back before us, or can staff manage that?
So as I mentioned before, we've been in discussion, and we know the team has been working pretty diligently on making these adjustments. I mentioned I was on the phone with Denise. I was talking to Brandon today, talking about different issues, and some things we align with and some not. And but I think a lot of the points here are very helpful. I'm happy to continue that with the commission's guidance. We're trying to take notes, trying to take clear notes on all the points you're making. I'd be happy to work with the team on this. There are some things that you mentioned with MAB that is out of our understanding and jurisdiction that we will, I think, know more about after the November 14th meeting. In terms of what the needs are to move forward, I believe there are concerns about creating the footings. Jonathan, you might remind us of like what your schedule is. If we were to come back with, you know, an updated version, I think it might be a problem for the construction schedule, although I think like at the very least, having agreement on the placement could be very helpful for your schedule. I assume that's your biggest concern, and I don't know about when installation for the actual content would be and when you need that all, you know, completely finalized and gone to production.
Yeah, no,
Karen.
I mean, thank you, Karen. I think certainly we're kind of building and flying the plane a little bit at the same time. But again, I think it's actually very helpful that as the process of like trying to propose the signage, we're learning more about how the signage can be more accessible, which is very, I guess, it's a very productive process. But yeah, relative to how that ties into a construction schedule, I think there are some ideal kind of dates that we're trying to hit. So yeah, to Karen's point, I think our hope is to kind of get some consensus or support on the scope of the signage, the location of the signage, the overall kind of form. I think taking into account some of what was said here, like around sort of clearance and whatnot. And I think the fact that this is essentially a two-piece installation whereby the sign itself can be replaced should we learn more about how the sign can be even more accessible, or if there's more review. Our hope would be that again, we're meeting with a focus group of the Perkins Pool and the Blind next week, and others as well in the short term, all in advance of, with the intent that they are going to provide a recommendation to MAB at that hearing on November 14th. So hopefully
I feel like there's two ways forward here. One, we could approve the and lift the moratorium for the base of the signage without doing a final vote on the actual signage itself, you know, the text and that sort of thing. So that could enable you to move forward. I guess there's a couple of things that I would recommend. Obviously, the placement for code reasons off of the path. And I would like to encourage you to consider Brian's position on whether that one should flip to the other side of the path. If it means that it would be in the dark, then I don't think that's worth it. But if it, you know, if the illumination on that side would be sufficient, that it could still be understood, I think that would be a better position to have that piece in. Brian, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
But I think we could have that be a staff discussion with you, and you could say, no, the illumination from the lamp would cast a shadow on it, and therefore you wouldn't be able to read it at night. I don't think that would be worth moving it to the other side. But if it is illuminated on that side, and you can also see in the way that the other two work, you could also see the sculpture while you're reading, I think that would be a better solution.
Okay.
So with that, maybe that makes sense for us to approve that side of it, and then have you guys come back at our next meeting with a more finalized draft based on our feedback that we've been giving you.
Yes.
You could come back with a final layout of this document, and we could review it then and have any last tweaks, a chance for any last tweaks at that point.
Yeah, Mark, that would be much appreciated to enable us to not stop on the like deep construction aspects. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it seems like the size wouldn't change very much anyway, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So could I get a motion from someone that, maybe Brian, do you want to do that with your proviso about the side of the one marker number 2, I believe?
Yeah, do you want, and I took notes on all of, I think where's all of the recommendations. Do you want to include that or just the placement?
Don't do a motion on the other recommendations that the proponents can come back to us having listened to those and hopefully integrated them.
Yes.
Okay.
So we just need a shorter motion on the foundation and the base of the piece.
Okay.
Good luck.
It does, and this is including the removal or the exclusion of the piece from the moratorium, or is that?
Yes, we should do that, right? We need to do that. Karen, should we do that as a separate vote? No, we could do it in the integrated, right?
Yeah, I don't see why not. We have it separated out in the layout here, but I don't think it necessarily, we've done them separately before, I'll say that. But I don't see why you couldn't work it in. We can share the motion drafting page also, so it might be a little bit easier to make sure. We just want to make sure we get it an accurate representation of what the motion actually is so that we can refer to it later.
Okay.
Do we need to lift the moratorium first and then approve the bones
I
of
think we
the
can do them at
sign?
the same time.
Or are we going to put them together?
Yeah, last time we did the motion and then we lifted the moratorium. I think we could put them together. If Brian's that skilled, I'm excited to hear how skilled Brian is at these.
Well, I guess I have a question of, thinking back to our last meeting where we exempted the monument from.
We have the
do we
exact
wanna-
language we used last time on a slide here. I can share it with you if it's helpful.
Yeah, exempting is the language I think we want to use. Exempt this space from.
Okay, so
I can put it in
then,
chat if you want. Hold on, give me 1 second. This is the motion from last time that I.
okay. Well, I think the motion would just be to exempt the base of the signage from the moratorium on monuments in Boston Common, to allow for the installation of the base of the signage. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, we could also say base and foundation of the signage.
And that's for the 3?
Of the 3, of the 3, what do we call them? What are the name of them?
The gateway markers.
3
gateway markers.
I would say with the recommendation that marker number 2 be looked to move to the other side of the path as a possible.
Path should illumination support it?
And or maybe even just consideration. I don't know if I want to, if we make the recommendation, then it turns out to kind of not best suit for legibility or whatnot. Just to, kind of a general consideration maybe of marker number 2's placement.
Brian, can I ask another question? Is it possible to include in this that the placards are coming as part of this component, pending approval of the messaging or approval of the content? Because do you have to lift the moratorium again when the placards come back? It's just a question.
We will, yeah. It's not too hard for us to lift the moratorium.
Okay, lots of lifting.
I think we'll just do it. We'll do it as part of that. I think it's clearer if we keep this separate from that.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for trying to save us one more. It's a heavy lift.
I'm just trying to understand all this. Learning a lot.
Yeah.
And then I'm just remembering from the last meeting too, we added that lessons about the motion shall not be interpreted to exempt from the moratorium any aspects of the work that has not been previously approved by the Boston Art Commission. I don't know if we want to incorporate that again.
I think that's good, yeah.
Sorry, could you just say that one more time?
Yes, the motion shall not be interpreted to exempt from the moratorium any aspects of the work that, or signage in this case, I don't know, that have not been previously approved by the Boston Art Commission.
Yeah, that's good. All right, very skillful, Brian. Well,
team
so we have a
effort.
motion on the table. I will read off the names of the commissioners. Please say yes if you're in agreement with the motion. John?
Mark,
Chair,
Mark,
I think we need a second.
I can
Oh, we need
second.
we need a second. Oh, I keep on forgetting our second. Who was our second?
I was gonna second, but
Okay, Kim is our second. Thank you.
I'm
So, and now we'll read off the list of commissioners. Please say yes if you're in agreement with the motion. John?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes,
Cara?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
And Kim?
yes.
And I'm a yes as well, so the motion passes. Congratulations, you can get started on those foundations. And we look
Alright.
forward to seeing you at our
Thank
next
you.
to discuss hopefully the final version of the graphics for the panel itself.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and then the second part of the request is for, I don't know what the best way is to show that, is for key stakeholder recognition. Now this part I have some strong reservations about because it runs counter to and does not comply with our policies. And I think would potentially set a problematic precedent for us as a commission. And furthermore, I think it refocuses the attention away from the theme and the artist, which are the things that we are most concerned with, towards the, towards people who deserve recognition, just we do not have that on the piece or in relationship to the piece in our policies. So I think those names should be celebrated online or perhaps in other contexts, but I have reservations about it here. I wanted to open it up to other commissioners for their viewpoints on this request.
Mark, I don't have anything to add, but I would agree with you. I would be concerned about the precedent that this sets. So I would probably be not prepared to support this request if we were asked to vote.
I'd like to ask, what was the motivation of this request? And who are the stakeholders?
Hi, everyone. This is Imar from Embrace Boston. Great to see you all. We're 66 days from holding hands and celebrating this memorial. And so thank you for your real work behind all of this and getting us this far. It's I can't believe it's been 3 years since I've been a part of this project and that we're 66 days away. I'm hoping not to jinx ourselves in this process. And I was just chatting with Jonathan earlier and just thinking about that word stakeholder, although that wasn't the stakeholder that I would have, the word stakeholder wasn't the word that I would have wanted to use. And I think for some reasons we put the word stakeholder, but I would rather refer to that title page as our founder stones. And thinking about at least my involvement in the project over the last 3 years, the evolution of this project really being a call for proposals for Dr. King and its evolution to recognizing Dr. and Mrs. King, to its evolution to recognize other heroes, particularly from the years 1950 to 1975, and thinking about this larger ecosystem of the Kings being important figures in our national movement around social justice and civil rights, but also thinking about the hidden figures in Boston, Mrs. King being a hidden figure in plain sight, and the 71 other individuals that are memorialized on this plaza. And so this evolution around this memorial being a representative of Boston's contribution to social justice, but also us understanding the role of monuments and memorials differently. The first memorial in this country, the Emancipation Memorial, which I know this commission, Boston's version of the Emancipation Memorial, we decided to take it down, was the first memorial where the founders of the memorial, 100% of the funds raised, the $18,000 raised for the first Lincoln Memorial in this country was raised entirely by Black folks. Now, the design of the memorial didn't go as they planned. Frederick Douglass stated thus in his opening remarks and the dedication of the memorials, but this memorial represents one of the few memorials, less than 5 memorials, where the founders of the memorials were made up of people of color. And so the 5 folks that we're asking to be named as founders on this are Damon and Kia Martin, Reverend Jeffrey Brown, Reverend Liz Walker, and Paul English. And so of our 5 founders, 4 of them are Black folks. And thinking about our country's history with memorials, the 2 most popular organizations that have sponsored memorials have been the Daughters of the American Confederacy and the Daughters of the American Revolution. They've been responsible for over 75% of the memorials erected in this country. And so there's less than 5 memorials that were erected where the founding principles of that memorial were made up of Black folks, the Emancipation being the first and this being the latest. And so as we think about the full circle of this memorial, the story of the kings and an ecosystem of other leaders, the story of who wanted this memorial, who was the brainchild behind that, we thought it would be fitting so that in history, when you think about the Brewer Fountain that was founded by John Brewer and the benefactors of the renovation, they were listed as benefactors of the renovation of this. We thought the story of the 5 founders of this, 4 of which are Black people, of this memorial in Boston Common, America's oldest park, was a part of this larger story of this memorial. And so that's why we're asking to include them into this overall narrative of who were the founders of this memorial, who were a part of the ecosystems of the Kings being here. The King, of course, major contribution to social justice and civil rights, and the ongoing story. And that's where the digital experience came into play. And so stakeholders is probably not the word that I would use. I would use the words founders, because when we tell the story of this memorial, our 5 founders are Damon and Kia Martin, Reverend Jeffrey Brown, Reverend Liz Walker, and Paul English.
And just to clarify, you're also asking for 2 other organizations to be listed, is that correct?
So one of the organizations is Embrace Boston, and the other one is the Boston Foundation. And so the founding space is the Boston Foundation. And so that's kind of the overall encapsulation of the markers there. But I would say the most important piece would be the individuals. If there was a hierarchy of importance, the organizations being the containers in which the individuals were able to fulfill this mission.
Okay.
Not benefactors, not donors. So I think we're trying to think of a word that made sense. So there's no TD Bank North Garden on this. There's no Lynch Foundation, no disrespect to Lynch Foundation, which is on the Brewer Fountain. It's really thinking about the folks who put the shoulders to the wheel around making this happen, at least this version of this memorial.
Okay, thank you. Are there other commissioner questions or comments?
I think my question would be, and Amari, thank you for that, that kind of context. That's really helpful. I think my question would be like, so for the average viewer that's kind of experiencing the plaza, how would they discover or kind of come to know that context? It sounds like that will be incorporated into the kind of audio experience. Is that accurate?
It will, and I think there was this conversation, and maybe I got outvoted on the conversation where there was this explicit word founder underneath the folks' names, and I think in smarter designers said that wasn't a good idea. So I wanted it to be a lot more explicit, where it said founder on underneath the names of the people, and I think it ended up making more sense design-wise to, I guess, not include that word.
Yeah, I think that's my kind of question is like for the person who doesn't choose to participate in the audio experience, which might be like a majority of the people, how would they make sense of like these names?
And the
Brian,
fact
Were
that
to insist the word founder being there, I wouldn't object.
Yeah, I mean, Brian,
Yeah.
I'm kind of in Amari's camp on this nomenclature, but I think we removed the word founder for the reason why we were told that, you know, everything we're talking about right now. So would that help you answer that question? If I were, and I also wanted to designate the difference between these names and the other names on the plaza by defining them as the founder.
That's actually my concern, is that how are these particular names differentiated from the other names that will be included, and how within that sort of circle of names, where do these fit in relation to the others?
Yeah, I think by explicitly labeling them as the founders, it's very separate. There will be bios for all of the people that are on the Freedom Plaza. There will be biographical information about all of them and their role in the civil rights movement in Boston during the specific period. So there's a whole reason of why those folks were selected to be, you know, shine a light on their work in that way.
Maybe just elaborate just kind of graphically in terms of hierarchy. Yeah, I mean, these are carved into a stone 1 inch tall, that on a small stone on the perimeter. The names that are being honored are in bronze at a bigger scale within the plaza itself. So there's a very clear hierarchy, very explicit between the two. But yeah, I hear everything, and I acknowledge kind of comments about how can we better contextualize. And I know the word founder was something that was discussed a lot in internal meetings, or in meetings with VSC staff.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Founders, we are entering a lot of conversations around the Founders Memorial on the Common that I think we're all familiar with, and sort of the negative associations with that word and the choice of those words. So that was, I think, part of what I suggested, that we're planning on entering a lot of future conversations too, exploring the problems with that artwork. And I questioned the association it might have.
But there could be I know stakeholders wasn't a word because I know it gives the connotation of benefactors or folks who've given, and not everyone who's given. I mean, they've given time, or, you know, more millionaires than millionaires here. So, but I think the right word is important, because I think the differentiation between benefactors or that kind of framing, you know, I think we were also trying to avoid, you know, this being a place where whoever gave the most got to be on here, which is, you know, not in the spirit of anything that any of us want to do. But I think that we just didn't know a word. I don't know if co-founders sound better than founders, and you know, also respecting and understand that conversation Karen's talking about, that I know is on the horizon. Just, you know, I think that figuring out how to identify them and kind of say that piece of it.
I mean, I appreciate, Amari, all that you've said. I still find it to be outside of our policies, which are for a reason. You know, sort of memorializing the makers of a memorial is something that feels a little too soon. I realize that all of these people had a profound impact on the place that we live in by doing this work. But we typically memorialize things many years after the fact. In fact, we have a limitation on that. And this is sort of memorializing the act of memorializing. So I find it in conflict with our policies, although I'm, you know, drawn to your argument that this is an important group of people who've made a major difference in the city. But I find it problematic to memorialize them in the same way that the civil rights leaders are. I think it's confusing. I see a challenge in it to our future work as well, making exceptions for this. And I wonder if there's maybe another format or another place where that can be done and they can be acknowledged elsewhere. Kim, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna, reinforce that in terms of, I feel it's really about the semantics, about identifying how these 6 entities, people and entities were visionaries, supporters. There's so many words that don't fully grasp what they are, but I think that may be the key, is if that designation is established, whatever it may be, would make it easier, I think, for us to approve such a thing. And maybe having it somewhere else, another piece of signage or something like that. Or I would actually recommend even going back to the artists and seeing, like, how this group of people could fit into that larger vision in a different way. I think
personally, I have
it's
more
really
reservation if it's part of the art than if it's away from the art. I think if it were more like a plaque, maybe we could make an exception, but right now it's really part of the ensemble. And it's literally engraved in the stone of the ensemble of the piece and its context. So to me, it feels like it's, I have reservations about it still. Despite, again, I hear what you're saying, Amari, and I think it's significant.
Would you consider, if I'm hearing correctly, perhaps it's part of the language on the signage itself?
I mean, I can't speak for the whole commission, and that would still not be within our policies, but I think I would find it easier to acknowledge it, to have that acknowledgement be present in a place where it's outside the ensemble than where it's inside the ensemble.
I would also support that. I think kind of in this format, my first reading of these is that, the way that these types of kind of paint markers are used in other installation park settings is like they're the individuals who have given a financial contribution to make that project happen. And that's kind of, I think, my first read without knowing that context. So I think that kind of removal or somehow keeping them separate from that, or just kind of not reading as a brick on the ground that you walk on top of, would help with that.
If I can chime in, I mean, I think this is certainly a unique situation in that it's the people these founders are talking about in partnership with the city, the artist team, all kind of work together on this. And so I could, maybe I'm just sort of affirming what's been said so far. I mean, I could certainly see a scenario whereby the accreditation component of the other signage could maybe be expanded to include this in a way that is thoughtful. And that is a better place for, that is, to what's being said here, a space where we can have that accreditation and an acknowledgement as part of that sign that is removed from the artwork itself. So there's a little bit of that critical distance.
Yeah, I mean, again, I personally, I would be more comfortable with that. And especially, I think what happens here is there's a hierarchy of the artist who contributed to this is, out in a sign somewhere, and then somebody who was, behind the scenes working on it as a civic leader is present in the ensemble itself. And that feels, from our perspective, we want the artist to be recognized as probably the lead voice. After the theme, of course, the memorialization itself is the most important thing, but then the artwork and the artists are, to us, quite important. So I think if it were, I mean, we do have some reference to organizations and artists in the context of signage. Maybe there could be a case made for that in this instance.
I think if it's going in that direction, then I think that whole plaque needs to be rethought. And I think, as my earlier comment about the hierarchy of what information is on that plaque, again, I think what we had seen before with the MASARY proposal was you understood quickly what the piece name was, who the artist, when it was created. And I didn't read that as clearly in the plaque. And I think if we're going to add some additional information, such as
Sure.
these, folks and entities, then I think the plaque really needs to be thought about comprehensively. And I know something that I would want us to come back to us to begin to understand how all this is working.
Could the plaque become longer and more like a, like a more continuous set of information rather than a single,
I don't know.
or is that difficult?
My concern is the more information that goes in the plaque or the sign, the less legible and less the people are really going to look at it. I think the simpler, more straightforward the information is, the clearer. I think people then will look at it. If it's too complicated, they'll just walk right by. And that's what I worry about. Because I think it's important for people to know what they're looking at. So.
Right.
You know, Michael, I think we just need to digest all the input today and really, hearing what you're saying. The role of like celebrating the artist is 100% behind less is more and letting the work speak for itself. So we're we love Hank and we're so respectful of everyone behind this effort and the artists themselves. So a way to, for us to sort of listen to everything we've learned today and think about the hierarchy and see if we can contain representation of these visionaries that made this possible and these incredible leaders that have given skin in the game to this effort. I think all of this is worthy of sort of a thoughtful rethinking.
Can we build enough flexibility into our motion that if you did need to change the dimensions of the signage, that you could do so, to meet your schedule for the foundations? I feel like, can we go back to our motion?
Oh, that's not for me to answer. I'd love that. Yeah.
I feel for you in that if, we've approved a plaque that's this size, but now we're saying maybe you could put more information on it. We don't want it to be jammed in, like Michael was saying. We wanted to make sure it's legible.
Didn't we just approve the structure for the signage though, not the sign itself?
Yeah. But is it open and ended enough that they could change the dimensions? I guess that's my question.
To allow for the installation of the base and foundation of the 3 gateway markers. There's no reference to like the sign being as
great. So our intent is to allow you to meet with staff and determine if there needs to be a bigger foundation.
I think we will proceed with that flexibility in mind in terms of sizing the foundation and whatnot. So obviously continue conversation with staff, and I think would love to just, as part of the last motion, be on the agenda for the next hearing to look at the plaque again and look at this all.
Okay. All right. I don't think that we need a motion unless, is there a commissioner that wants to make a motion on this? I don't think we need a motion to reject if we're mostly in agreement that this, but if there are those who think that this should be approved, speak up now.
I would suggest we make a motion to table this subject or until the next meeting of the Boston Art Commission to see a revised proposal for the plaque face and possibly the foundation and support of the plaque face.
Michael, I would encourage us to allow us to move forward with the pouring the foundations and moving forward, or else we won't be able to have this ready for the unveiling in January.
Yeah, I think our current motion allows you to do that.
Right, I think the motion
I
is
don't
only
think we need to
referring to
repeat that.
what's on the screen today, right now. This,
Oh,
Oh, for these? No,
Correct.
it didn't, that motion didn't address the founder stones. It was talking about
no,
the gateway markers.
Yeah.
yeah, it was only the gateway markers. I could see us saying that we're going to table this. I'm not hearing a lot of support for these panels as they've been shown today. I don't think we need to explicitly reject them. And you can always come back and ask again, but it seems like there's not much support from the commission right now. So I don't think we even need to table it. It's, you know, up to you to determine if you'd like to represent
Okay.
new strategy, which we might recommend and support. But I think the current strategy hasn't found enough support from the commission to, because it's out of compliance with our policies. And so I think it's better if you come back with a new proposal for how you might recognize folks, and that can be engaged with something new or with the plaque that you're developing. I do believe that our policies specifically outline what can be on the plaque, and there is maybe a little bit of wiggle room in the list of things that are recommended for a plaque, to make room for some of the, whatever we call these leaders who supported this moving forward.
Unfortunately, I'm very familiar with all of those parameters. And so let's think about the conversation we had today, and we'll push it through our spaghetti press and think about how to reorganize it. And, you know, Michael, the question about hierarchy, all of that was heard. So thank you for your input and for your thoughtful responses here today.
Okay, great. And Karen, I'd encourage you to keep working with the team to help find a good solution moving forward before our next meeting. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us. And we look forward to 66 days from now celebrating with you.
Yes, please. If we're still standing.
Yes. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Our last order of business would be a motion to adjourn. Nobody wants to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
Thank you, John. And you seconded before I was able to forget to ask for a second. So if as I read your name, please say yes if you're in agreement with the motion. John?
Yes.
Michael?
yes.
Cara?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. So we are officially adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for all the work on all these projects. And we look forward to seeing everyone in a month from now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.